Submitted by Ken Reed. This was about 12 years ago. My dad always receives deliveries, more or less every day, for his home business. He was out at the gym and my mum was at work, and 14-year-old me was sitting in my room playing World of Warcraft or something. Since my dad always receives deliveries in the form of cardboard boxes, I always carry a cardboard knife nearby. I heard a noise downstairs, and assuming it was a delivery, I picked up the knife and head on down. I bumbled down the stairs, trot through to the kitchen where the back door is, and find a tall, 6'3" dude standing there, red t-shirt, very patchy facial hair, and about 19-year-old or so. At first I thought it was the delivery guy, or the delivery guy's son, but it didn't make sense. He would just walk in. So I just assumed it was a client for my dad. So I sort of go, "Hey," and without thinking much of it, still wielding this knife, I see his eyes widen, look down at my knife in my hand, widen more, then he runs out of the house and hops the 6-foot wall. It must have taken me a good 5 seconds till after he disappeared before I realised he was probably trying to rob us, and I accidentally scared him off. Can only imagine if I didn't have that knife in my hand. The dude was much bigger than me, and could have easily floored me if he wanted. Potential robber? Let's not meet. Submitted by Abaddon. My family recently travelled to Paris for the first time. We decided to use the Paris metro to travel around the city, which didn't work so well since we're Americans with limited comprehension of French. We were terribly lost and trying to figure out what train to get on the wall chart. My mum, little sister, and I have our backs turned to the tracks when suddenly I sense someone walking up behind me. I turn, my immediate assumption being that someone is trying to pickpocket me. There's a man standing directly behind me, startling close. Neither my mum or sister standing next to me noticed him walking up. I stumble back, tripping into the wall, and he follows me, putting my shoe up on a ledge, physically cutting me off from the rest of my family. They are looking at me, stunned and silent at this bizarre encounter. I managed to dart around him as he continued to crowd in closer and move to the stand behind my mum. Quite embarrassing as a grown-ass woman, but I was seriously freaked out. As soon as I do this, his attention snaps to my sister, who is still frozen in place. He starts to move towards her, but suddenly a train comes into the station and he jumps on it instead. I turn around as it's leaving to see him staring at me as it moves away. He clearly had mental health issues, but I've never been so unsettled by someone before in my life. I refuse to ride the metro for the rest of my trip. Submitted by The Only Mike, 25. For some context, I grew up in the area of the US with a large Somali and Mexican populations. My neighbourhood, coincidentally, consists of homes with primarily white families towards each end of the block, with Mexican and Somali families in the middle of the block. Anyways, the case takes place when I was around 9. I was out playing with some neighbours in the front of our yards, all boys around the same age. We were playing tag in the front of the houses of the Mexican and Somali families, as we often did. Eventually my neighbour, Abdi's 5-year-old sister, Fatima, comes out to play too. We continue playing when after a while I notice Fatima slowly walking to the black car parked in front of their house that belonged to their father. I tilted my head and realised suddenly that there was a white man waving his hand and signalling to Fatima to come closer from within the car. I realised that the car wasn't her father's, but instead another car of the same model. And being that man was white, it was safe to presume that wasn't a guest for any of the houses near where he parked. Abdi called to me, and then he must have came to the same realization after noticing me stare. After, he quickly yelled for Phasma to come back and not to go near the car. Once the man realized we noticed him, he slowly and casually drove away. I was a little shaken, but we continued to play, never reaching out to our parents and never thinking anything of it. While it just seemed like a creepy incident as a kid, it had much darker overtones as an adult. Now that I know human trafficking of Somali girls was coming in my area due to migrants being easier targets. What's more disturbing that there is a high chance this was premeditated due to the man having the same make car as Abdi and Fatima's father, and that Fatima, despite being only 5-year-old, was likely an intentional target for human trafficking. Submitted by Spruce Moose. In January 2011, my then boyfriend and I flew to New York City for his 21st birthday. We were both excited. We'd never been overseas before. We're Australian, and we were really looking forward to seeing the city. We arrived at JFK around about 10:30 p.m. and were so exhausted. Our luggage seemed to take forever to get off the carousel. As we were waiting, we listened to the warnings over the loudspeaker that stated we were only to get into yellow cabs and not to get into unmarked cars. We get our luggage and head out for the exits, where there were a few taxis and one guy in a driver's uniform who came up and then asked us if we want to ride. We say yes, and he takes my suitcase and starts heading across the crossing. At this point, my stomach drops because he walks past all of the taxis and continued into a dark car park across the road. We follow him cautiously because he has my suitcase, but we start to say that we're not interested and want to go back. He stops at a black BMW, and I say to him, "Sorry, but we're going to go to get a taxi." And he turns and looks at me and says, "Don't worry, baby, I'm legit." At this, I grab my bag and we nope the fuck out of there and into a yellow taxi. The driver says to us, "Yeah, you were either almost mugged, kidnapped, or murdered. You gotta be careful out here." So, guy who was grabbing my suitcase and tried to do God knows what to a naive kid in New York City for the first time, let's never meet again. Submitted by Joe's Castle. I was about 7 or 8 years old, would be roughly about 1999 or 2000, where I was at a public park with a local summer day camp program. I remember playing tag with 2 random kids that weren't part of the program. I had veered off almost to the opposite end of the playground, in the park where the program staff would have less visibility of me. The 2 kids and I were running near an area that was close to the street curb where cars were parked. The next thing I see is a very heavy-built lady jump out of the side of somewhat of a bushed area near the perimeter of the park, and she completely clotheslined me off my feet. Once I hit the ground, I remember the lady telling me, "What are you doing chasing my kids?" Immediately after, she picks me up by the back of my shirt and starts pulling me towards a car by one of my arms. The car had a man already in the driver's seat, with the right rear door open. I was able to break free of her grasp and ran back to one of the staff, part of the program. One of the ladies responsible for watching us, that when I went to her, was completely oblivious to what just happened, as well as the rest of the staff. They only knew what happened though when I told them after the fact. Oddly, no claims to have seen what happened at the park. It was just a random weekday during the summer. But I do remember the staff calling the cops and reporting what happened. I've told this story to family and close friends to let them know that they need to teach their kids to respond in danger. Whether it be to yell for help or run, it's doing something. Had I frozen in fear, I would have been dragged straight into that car. Submitted by Atheist Lady. So about 20 years ago, when I was about 10 or 11, I can't remember the exact age, I lived a good distance from a local park next to a river. One day I decided to walk or ride my bike there. I can't remember too many details. I can't remember if I went to nearby friends and called my mum or if she just knew where to look because I went there a lot at some point. I ended up on a picnic bench at the park, not sure if waiting for my mum or just hanging. But I'll never forget the encounter. I was seated at the picnic table at the park. I recall a blue pickup, but I could be way off here. An old man walks up to the picnic table I am seated at and sits down across from me. He proceeds to tell me how lonely he is and that he would like me to come back to his house to keep him company. His wife recently passed away and he's been so alone. I had sympathy for this old man, but also at the point I knew something was up and told him that my mum and dad wouldn't be okay with this. He basically said some creepy shit like they wouldn't know. And now my mum shows up. She sees me chatting with the old man in the park and promptly ushers me into the car. The ride home isn't about her scolding me for running off, but instead she questions me about the old man in the park. I didn't know what might have happened to him after that, but I do know if my mum didn't show up when she did, something awful could have happened to me that day. Submitted by Pop Arts from Saturn. This happened in the beginning of last year. I was walking home after getting out of the bus station from seeing my then boyfriend. Fun trivia, we broke up earlier that day. From the station to my house, I had to walk 20 to 30 minutes, and it's quite dangerous at night. Fortunately, it was 4 or 5 p.m, and considering middle of the day, in the middle of the walk, started drizzling, and I started walking faster. When I was 3 or 4 blocks away from my house, a white car stopped by my side and someone said, "Hey!" And since my sister's fiance visits a lot, and it was a model that really looked like his car, I stopped to greet him. And when I looked inside, it was some random dude that said, "Hey, it's raining. I think you want to ride." And I thought, what the fuck? But then said, "Nah, thanks," and kept walking. He was driving really slow and said, "You, get in," and I faked not hearing it. There wasn't much I could do. There was barely anyone outside, and I got desperately thinking he could get out and force me inside the vehicle. The third time he told me to get in, I said, "Dude, fuck off," and started power walking. I didn't want to go to my place because I thought he could follow me, but it was safer than any other place I could go. It was deserted. He followed me for about 2 or 3 large blocks, but I felt like 100. I went up my street, running, and when I got home, I went to take a 20-minute shower. The same minute, I didn't want my parents seeing me a bit shaken, because they told me to get home sooner, because it was dangerous walking alone. To everyone who tells people to get in their cars, go fuck yourself.